Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, The Challenges of Expanding and Managing IoT Device Deployments and Services. I'm Sue Troy, Executive Editor at the IoT Institute. Before we begin, there are a few things to know about this webinar technology. This platform allows our audience to be more involved with the presentation, and it allows you to watch the event the way you want to watch it. To begin, feel free to customize your webcast console. You can move windows around by dragging on the title bar or resize your windows by clicking on the lower right corner of any window. On your console, the Aris logo is hyperlinked. If you want to visit their website during the webcast, you can click on the logo and a new window will open. This will not take you out of the webinar. You'll also notice a toolbar at the bottom of the console. These buttons allow you to open and close widgets on your screen. You can ask questions during the presentation. To do that, type your question into the Q&A box and click Submit. We'll answer as many questions as possible at the end of today's session. We also invite you to interact with us on social media. If at any time during our session today you hear something interesting, feel free to tweet your followers using the Twitter widget. You can also download a copy of the slides by clicking on the PDF icons in the resource list. Note also that this presentation is being recorded and will be available for 1 year on demand on the IoT Institute website. We appreciate your feedback, so please click on the survey icon at the left of the toolbar and complete the form. If at any time you experience difficulties with the audio or slides, just press your F5 key to refresh the webinar console. And now, with that housekeeping stuff out of the way, it's time to introduce today's speaker. We have Evan Whitelock here with us today. Evan is Product Marketing Manager for Aeris Communications. He's worked at Aris and in the IoT machine-to-machine space for more than 5 years. He currently leads product marketing efforts at Aris, where he's responsible for product development, go-to-market strategies, and sales enablement. Prior to this role, Evan sold IoT solutions at Aris for 3 years, working directly with mid-size and large enterprises and partners on IoT solution design and implementation. Evan, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Sue. Excuse me. So, welcome everybody to this webinar. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to listen today. We're going to be talking about, a lot of the trends in IoT in terms of, connectivity and connectivity management. And really what I want to cover today is to go through some of the, what's evolving with IoT deployments and some of the drivers that's leading to a new set of challenges around connectivity. Moving beyond the traditional cost and coverage concerns, there are far more impacts around connectivity and global connectivity and the impacts, especially on the operational side. So we're going to spend some time, first talking about the drivers behind some of these new trends and some of these new challenges, and then get into the impacts of these challenges. What makes, managing multiple carriers so challenging? What makes managing multiple technologies so challenging? And then finish up with looking at some possible solutions and some things to think about as you look to solve some of these challenges within your own business. So hopefully will resonate with where a lot of you are today in your IoT journey and figuring out connectivity. As another reminder, we do have a Q&A section. If you do have any questions that you'd like me to respond to or answer, we do have a Q&A session at the end. So please feel free to post those, and we will get to those at the end of the webinar. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. Very briefly, I just wanted to do a quick introduction to Aris. Just for those of you who aren't familiar with what we do and where we fit in the IoT space, we're a global IoT solution provider. We focus primarily on providing IoT connectivity and IoT connectivity management, as well as IoT solutions and IoT application platforms, going all the way to actually full end-to-end connected car platforms. So we have locations around the world. Our headquarters is in the Silicon Valley here in California, but we also have offices in Chicago, in the UK, India, and Japan as part of our joint venture with SoftBank. And we do provide global solutions. Couple more bits of information about us and our size. We're around 275 people. Majority in engineering and operations. We're very much first a technology company. And And, again, with the global reach, in terms of not only the countries that we provide solutions in, but, also in terms of, both from the connectivity as well as our application solutions. So, a couple more numbers coming up next in a second, around, put Aris in the context of the global IoT space. But before we do, want to introduce a poll, and we're going to look at these results in just a second. First, want to understand where you are in your IoT journey, just to get a sense of who's coming to listen today, and what challenges you might be seeing. So, would love for you to take a quick second to answer, to let me know if you're exploring if IoT is right for your business, if you're already building a proof of concept, if you've moved beyond that and you're planning a deployment in the next 3 months, or if you've got a solution and you're already deployed, you're already out there, and you're looking to scale or looking at your next generation. So please take a quick second to answer this poll, and when you're done, go ahead and click submit, and we will look at the results here in just a second. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to click and then click submit. As those polls get calculated and get ready to load, again, just some other quick numbers about Aris and where we fit in the IoT space. Again, global operational reach, especially on the connectivity side. We do support over 10 million connected IoT devices today on our cellular networks, and those are combined processing over 1 billion IoT messages, everything from network signaling to data packets to information being sent and so forth. And that puts us in the top 10 worldwide in terms of IoT units under management. But let's go ahead and load those results right now. So looks like a healthy mix across the board, and many of you are here to see if IoT is going to be right for your business, and makes a lot of sense. Welcome to the party. There's certainly a lot of hype around IoT and a lot of potential, and as it continues to grow, more and more use cases are becoming more obvious, and many more companies are getting involved. So for those of you that are just getting started, welcome. Many of you, and then the rest of you, looks like a fairly even split between building a proof of concept and planning your deployment, and then looking to scale. So that's great to see, because we've got some hopefully some tidbits that are going to be helpful for you as you look to solve the challenges that you're currently faced with as you launch and as you grow. So yeah, very good to see that there's a good mix across the board here. But enough with the introductions. Let's go ahead and jump into it. As I mentioned, we're going to be looking at some of the the evolving trends with IoT and what's changing around IoT connectivity and connectivity management, and then look at the challenges that these evolving trends create. So the first one we're going to look at is multiple carrier connectivity and what's driving large IoT deployments into a multi-carrier environment, as opposed to just putting 100% of their deployment on a single carrier. The second we're going to look at is multiple technologies, moving beyond maybe 2G cellular or 3G or LTE or Wi-Fi. Building and expanding beyond just using a single technology is another thing we're going to look at, and then take a look at the challenges that present. And then lastly, around supply chains and the increasing complexity, especially as solutions scale and as they grow, and take a look at what's driving these complex supply chains, and then how you can best manage them. And so we will be taking a look at all of this, but we're going to start first with the drivers behind multiple carrier connectivity. What is leading companies to go pursue a multiple carrier environment, and how has that what's getting to this place now where a lot of deployments are managing multiple carriers. And it starts with coverage, especially in a cellular world. No single carrier covers 100% of the world. Not a knock on anybody, but carriers are regionally based. And especially as companies look to grow and expand internationally, it becomes more challenging to get the coverage that you need for the entirety of your deployment. The whole point of IoT is that devices can be connected so that you don't have to manually interact with them to either send information or control them. And if coverage is not available, if wireless technology is not available, it starts to defeat the purpose. This isn't, just so, making sure that the devices are covered and having a full, complete coverage footprint is obviously the priority. And again, because not every carrier has, 100% of the world covered, and even in the United States, none of the big four carriers have a complete 100% coverage footprint. In some areas, some carriers have a coverage advantage over others, and so piecing that together is a need and can be a challenge. This also, even on the international side as well, with international regulatory compliance. Some countries restrict permanent roaming. Brazil is notorious for that, for example, where you have to have an agreement with a local carrier in order to have connectivity on a permanent roaming basis in that country, or a permanent basis in that country. So, piecing together and creating a comprehensive and complete coverage footprint is difficult to do with a single provider. And so, looking to source connectivity from multiple carriers, multiple networks to complete that coverage footprint is a big driver behind the need to manage and have access to multiple carriers. The next factor we'll look at is pricing, is cost around these cellular subscriptions. As we've seen over time, cellular connectivity rates will drop and continue to drop. It is really a commoditized technology, and as new, more efficient technologies, 4G, LTE, eventually 5G come aboard, it becomes cheaper to send more data. Especially true when you look at, a growing IoT deployment. If you started your deployment on rates a couple years ago, the reality is that today those rates have probably decreased in the open market. So competitive offers from new providers are very attractive. Taking advantage of those offers can be difficult because you've built so many of your operational processes and so many of your coverage, expectations around, your current provider, and moving to add deployments of another provider can be difficult, but the cost benefits are often worth it. And so, pricing continues to be a driver for adding new carriers, bringing new carriers to your deployment, taking advantage of these lower offers that are in the marketplace. And then last, but certainly not least, what's driving multiple carrier agreements or multiple provider agreements is the emergence of new technologies. And we're going to touch on this a little bit further in a bit in terms of what those technologies are, but things like LTE-M or NB-IoT, LPWA connectivity on the horizon is going to be 5G. The reality is that not every operator, not every carrier is moving at the same pace in the same direction. And so some carriers may have a technology available, but some may not. And so if you need LTE-M, for example, maybe that means you have to source that from a different provider than you've used in the past. Again, creating an environment where you now have to manage multiple carrier agreements. So, coverage, pricing, and new technology availability are three of the largest drivers for why IoT deployments are moving towards a multiple carrier connectivity environment. We're going to cover the drivers for the other two sections before we jump into the challenges, because you'll see how they are often very intertwined, and it creates a single set of operational and management challenges. But first wanted to focus on the drivers. So, hopefully some of these drivers resonate in terms of what's driving towards, multiple carrier agreements. And so with that, now we're going to take a look at the drivers behind, multiple technologies. Why IoT solution designers, deployers, builders, what's driving them to take a look at multiple technologies. I know that it used to be in the past with IoT deployments, it was easier to pick one technology and go with it. But the reality is that, solutions are becoming far more complex, and the different technologies that are out there today, and the ones that are going away, can have tremendous impacts on decisions that you need to make. First and foremost, which is something that, for anybody that has, experience with IoT, especially cellular deployments, is the sunset of some legacy technologies. 2G connectivity was phenomenal for IoT because it had relatively low module costs, the hardware was cheaper, and the coverage was the largest coverage option available, especially for most IoT solutions that have very low bandwidth requirements. Things like a GPS tracking device that's sending very little amounts of data doesn't need necessarily the high performance of an LTE device, and then the high performance of an LTE or the high cost of an LTE device. So many IoT deployments have deployed on 2G and 3G networks, and the reality of the world, especially the cellular world, is that the operators make their technology decisions based on cell phones. Everybody on here listening, if we have a cell phone, you know how much you pay for that cell phone every month, and it's much higher than an IoT device that may be only sending a megabyte or 2 megabytes a month. And the carriers have built their business models around those consumer handsets. That's where their priorities are going to be. Now, we as humans with our smartphones and tablets, we're very greedy when it comes to data consumption, and we want to send more. So we need and we'll pay for those LTE networks, and that's where the carriers are going to focus. So what that means for these 2G, 3G networks is that they are going to go away as the carriers refarm that spectrum for their LTE networks. That means that any 2G devices out there are going to lose connectivity. They're going to be dead. They have to be replaced in order for that solution, that application to work. That means that planning around those replacements and figuring out how to evolve with the technology, it's very difficult. It's a big challenge, very common in the IoT space today. And so, that's one thing that's driving customers solution deployers to look at what new technologies are on the horizon that have an extended life cycle, that are going to be around for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And, my general recommendation is start planning in that direction now. Start using these newer technologies. New deployments going out the door probably should be on LTE. Obviously, depends on the specific application, but generally speaking, that's the case. And so that's a big driver for forcing people to look at new technologies. Not only that, but there's new innovative technologies coming out. I've mentioned briefly LTM or NB-IoT, LPWA. There's a lot of talk around 5G and what that could be, and everybody kind of wants to race to be the first one to have 5G, even though the standards aren't defined yet and it doesn't quite exist, but that's a whole separate topic for another day. But these solutions do offer real value for IoT deployments. LTM and NB-IoT, for example, much lower module costs, and so they present a lot of benefit. In addition to that, much lower battery drain. So devices that don't have a power supply can be in the field for even longer. There are real benefits to these technologies, and for the right applications, they make too much sense to ignore. And so how do you manage moving from 2G to LTM or 3G to LTM or even LTE to NB-IoT? What that creates is a scenario where you have legacy devices on an old technology and then new devices on a new technology. And so, as you look to create your next gen deployments, oftentimes it's the best option for you to look at those new technologies, especially as companies in an increasingly crowded marketplace look to create differentiation. As IoT grows, as more eyeballs are on it, we saw with our first poll that many of you are looking into, to get into IoT for the first time, understanding how it's going to work for your business. That creates competition. And so finding ways to lower cost and provide added value to your customers, oftentimes these new technologies are able to do things like that. Even if it's as simple as I mentioned, a lower cost LTM module that's going to reduce the BOM cost on your hardware and ultimately reduce how much the cost to your customers. That can be a big competitive advantage. And so these technologies can enable some of that. But again, to my point just a second ago, what this creates is an environment where you have multiple technologies that you then have to find a way to manage. And that's the solution. What we're going to talk about towards the end of this webinar is what's the best way to go about managing that. Before we jump into the last section, which is around complex supply chains and why they are becoming more increasingly complex, want to have one more quick poll question just to get a sense of for those of you that are planning a deployment or looking to deploy, what's your expected volume in terms of number of devices that you are anticipating needing to manage over the next 12 months? If you're just getting started, are you looking at 0 to 1,000 over the next month or 12 months? Are you moved past that a little bit and you're expecting to ramp a little bit, get into 1,000 to 10,000 range? Are you looking to really start growing into the tens of thousands of devices? Or are you looking to really expand and grow in a material way beyond 50,000? If you could take a second, answer this question real quick. We'll take a look at the results in just a second. But just want to get a sense of as you look to manage devices, obviously the more devices you have, the more difficult it is to manage. And so getting a sense of where you are on this scale. So please take a second to answer this and hit the submit button, and we will take a look at these results in just a second. All right, hopefully you've had a chance to answer. So as those poll results get loaded, the next thing we're going to talk about is around global scalability. And as you scale globally, what's happening with your supply chain and how that becomes even more complex, which can be very limiting for a lot of companies as they try to figure out how to scale. And so we'll take a look at some of the drivers with that. And but before we do, take a look at those poll results very quickly. So not surprising that a lot of you are in that 0 to 1,000 category, given that the majority of you, from the first poll are either looking at IoT to see if it's right for your business or just starting to, plan out your initial proof of concept. But a couple of you several of you have moved beyond that and are looking to scale. And so that's great to see, especially because while a lot of what we're going to be talking around with scalability and with managing complex supply chains as you grow, a lot of the flexibility that we're going to be talking about shortly, even though that's going to become most impactful once you start to scale into the tens or even hundreds of thousands of units, your ability to reach that number of units is going to be largely impacted by the decisions that you make today as you plan out your deployment. Making sure that you're planning for success in enabling growth as opposed to creating processes that are going to make that difficult down the road. So, great to see, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about is going to be applicable to you also. But then coming back to supply chain complexities and how they are becoming more complex, especially on a global scale. Let's take a look at what's kind of driving some of these supply chain complexities as you grow and as you scale, especially globally. Had mentioned previously, when we talked about coverage and the need for multiple carriers, that becomes especially true on a global scale. Traditionally in kind of yesterday's IoT world, global roaming SIMs seem to do a pretty good job, especially because most of the usage was pretty low. And as long as you're, generally in a couple megabytes or lower in terms of network activity in any given month, a single SIM that can roam globally and leverage international roaming agreements, you can fit that into your business model for the most part. Now that changes as you look to expand your usage. As you want to create differentiation and add new services, new features, new capabilities to your customers, it can be a big challenge to do that when you're limited by potential cost constraints, especially on a global scale. So what that does is that leads to a lot of scenarios where you have to adopt that multiple carrier environment and manage those different SKUs through your supply chain. To know that the SIM card that's meant for Europe is going to Europe, the SIM card that's meant for the U.S. is going to the U.S., and on and on. That can be challenging. And so that introduces additional complexity to your supply chain because you then have to manage multiple moving parts as you move from the manufacturing facility to the end deployment. Another aspect that's often overlooked but can present even more complexity to your supply chain is the utilization of a distribution channel. Often a critical key to scaling globally by leveraging distribution to get your product out there to more end locations. Makes a lot of sense and something that we see all the time. But it does create an additional management complexity because you're even more removed from the end user, the end customer, or the end deployment. The multiple layers of distribution make it more difficult to manage the connectivity through that distribution channel. When do you activate SIM cards, for example? Do you do it at the manufacturing facility and pay for it through the multiple layers of distribution? Do you trust the end user to do their own activations? It can be very difficult to plan out and find the optimal process through different distributors, especially if some distributors may be able to handle some capabilities, other distributors may not. And the manual nature of them needing to do those things, it can get very, very difficult. So furthermore, figuring out ways to build through distribution. If you want to not just have a connected product, but also resell that connectivity, that can be difficult through distribution. Obviously, there's a great benefit to reselling connectivity because that's recurring revenue to your business as opposed to a one-time for a product sale. So, but then again, making sure that the right customers get charged the right usage through distribution where you don't have direct access to those end customers can be a challenge. And then, a lot of what we've talked about now results in having multiple agreements, multiple carriers that you're going to have contracts with, multiple technology providers that you may have contracts with. And each one of those is going to come with its own platform, its own way of managing, and some are going to be better than others. But what that does is it creates an environment, a swivel chair environment, if you will, where you have to sometimes use one platform, sometimes use another platform. And though that can be manageable, as you look to expand and as you look to manage that through distribution, those multiple layers of distribution can make things significantly more challenging. So something we're going to talk even more about here in just a second. But to recap a lot of the drivers, again, coming back to this, this picture which we looked at, IoT deployments are constantly evolving and moving into a scenario where many of them are forced to look at multiple carrier connectivity, again, for reasons of cost and coverage, technology, service availability from different providers. Now an environment where you have to source connectivity from multiple different providers in very much a patchwork type way. Similarly, for multiple technologies, there are a lot of emerging technologies that are great for certain IoT use cases. Managing those in another patchwork environment can be very difficult. And so, then again, moving to the supply chain, once you've got all those multiple agreements and multiple platforms and multiple processes, that has an impact on the supply chain, which can severely limit your ability to scale. And so as we expand on these challenges specifically, we talked a lot about the drivers, right? What's driving the need for multiple carrier connectivity? What's driving the need for multiple technologies? And what's driving these supply chains to the point where they're difficult to manage? Now I want to shift towards what the impact is and what challenges that creates to your business. And the general theme is that the challenges that this environment creates, this multi-carrier, multi-platform environment, it stems from the fact that you now have to manage on multiple platforms. Your activation process for one SIM and on one provider could be drastically different from your activation process on another provider. When you look to go troubleshoot devices, it's going to be on different platforms. And so that can create a lot of challenges, starting with a lack of consolidated visibility and control. It makes it very difficult to maintain solution performance and cost when you don't know exactly what all of your devices are doing. Again, going back to having to look into one portal or one platform to understand what one device is doing, having to look into a different portal or platform to understand what another device is doing, you don't have a consolidated understanding, a clear understanding of what your deployment is doing. And that creates some very material risks. One, not only on the cost side, it's much more difficult to identify devices that are going to send, more data than they're supposed to, resulting in overage charges. You may not see that until the end of the month when it's already too late to fix, and you're stuck with that bill. But probably even more important is the potential security risk. Devices that are being used in ways they're not supposed to, it's possible they're being tampered with. It's possible that SIM card was stolen and put into another device. And being used to cause harm, not only potentially externally, but to your own deployment. So not having consolidated visibility and control makes it very difficult to understand what deployments are doing, and it can have some severe negative impacts on your business. It also increases the difficulty for your operations team. It creates a very complex environment where if you need to troubleshoot a device, if you need to understand what it's doing, figure out what the problem is and go fix it, your team has to be trained on multiple different platforms and multiple different processes. Your legacy deployments on 2G with one provider, you're going to have a different set of processes than your next generation deployments on another provider. As you look to add new technologies, add new carriers, that means every time you do it, you need to train your team on a new set of processes and a new set of tools. That can make their lives very difficult. It can make it so that it takes them longer to resolve issues, which not only is that negatively impactful for your business because it results in a poor end user experience, the devices aren't working the way they're supposed to, but it can be very costly. As we all know, operational resources, support resources, they come with a cost. And so the less efficient they are, the more time they're spending, trying to figure something out but don't have the right tools, less time spent being productive elsewhere. And so it ultimately is, one way where your operational costs can skyrocket in a big way. Additionally, looking at support across multiple platforms, what that really means is, in addition to multiple troubleshooting processes at your fingertips, when you call for help, when you need support from the provider to resolve an issue, you then have to track different 1-800 numbers, different portal logins, different levels of support expected with each provider. Your SLA may be different from one provider to the next, and that makes it very difficult to count on your ability to resolve an issue. It makes it difficult to promise a certain level of support to a customer if you don't know how long it's going to take to resolve that issue on the back end. The lack of visibility that we touched on in the first bullet point, that impacts your support team's ability to resolve issues themselves. And then combine that with the fact that they don't know necessarily, or you have to track what kind of support levels from each provider. That can extend an even longer times to resolution. Again, taking longer to resolve issues, negatively impacting your performance in your customer's eyes, potentially leading to a bad experience on their end and a lack of customer stickiness. It can be very, very challenging to manage if it's not all consolidated. And then the last point I want to touch on before we get into the fun part, which is, so then what's the solution? As I've touched on a couple times, any of these operational efficiencies, any of these challenges that we've talked about, they get magnified once you start looking at a more complex supply chain. As you look at adding layers of distribution to become more successful on the sales side, that makes things more difficult. Any issues that you're experiencing around delays to resolve an issue or lack of visibility on costs or performance, that becomes even more difficult as you expand. It restricts your ability to scale. Again, I had mentioned previously that for those of you who are, who responded that you're in that 0 to 1,000 unit category and you're just looking to, build a proof of concept or get started, think about these things as you figure out how am I going to be successful long term? What processes am I putting in place today that are going to allow me to scale successfully in the future? That's a big thing to think about now. And my recommendation is plan for success. How do these processes enable me to be successful down the road? Because as you grow, these issues become magnified. So now let's take a look at then what the answer is. And the answer to solve a lot of these problems is to move everything onto a single management platform. I had mentioned in, the previous part of the discussion, looking at the challenges, it all comes back to the fact that you have to figure out how to do everything the same way across multiple platforms, multiple processes, multiple procedures. The answer is not to try to limit yourself to a single carrier. The answer is not to try to limit yourself to a single technology. And the answer is not to avoid global distribution, because that's ultimately not going to lead to a solution where you have competitive differentiation in the marketplace, you're adding value, and you're setting yourself up for success. The solution comes in how do you go about managing those multiple carriers, those multiple technologies, and that complex supply chain. And it's all about how can you put everything into a single platform. For example, this allows you to optimize your deployment across the different coverage and rates that you have. The different agreements that you pulled in, the different carriers that you support, the different technologies. By putting those all into a single platform, we're going to touch on how that simplifies the management, but it gives you flexibility to more easily pick and choose where you want to put those deployments, because you're not limited by, well, I can't put this carrier in this area because it's harder for me to manage that one, and I just don't want to avoid it, even though they may have the best rate. This enables you to have a consolidated set of understanding as to what devices are doing, how they work, regardless of the underlying carrier, regardless of the underlying technology, so that you can focus on the things that matter, which is coverage and cost optimization. This will significantly reduce your operational complexities. What this creates is a single interface for deploying or managing all of your deployments. Again, regardless of carrier, regardless of technology. You can have the same activation process for devices that you may have on Verizon in the U.S. and Vodafone internationally, or whatever your carrier choice may be. By being able to bring those agreements into a single platform, you're able to reduce the interface to a single interface, whether that's portal or APIs, even more importantly. The ability to use a single platform's API sets, integrate those into your back-end systems and so forth. That means that any carriers you bring onto that platform, your API interface does not need to change. One of the big problems with trying to scale with adding carriers, adding technologies, is that means a new API integration every single time. By putting everything on a single platform, you can have one single API integration, and then everything gets backloaded onto that platform on the other side of it, on the back end, so that your interface does not change. But those devices are managed through that platform that you are already integrated with. It also makes it so that when your operations team needs to go, troubleshoot an issue, identify what's going on, they don't have to be trained on multiple platforms. They can just, use the systems that train on one system and get used to that. Ultimately, this provides flexibility for future growth. That single platform interface means that you can much more easily add new technologies, add new carriers to your business, to your deployment, and manage those in the same efficient, effective way that you are already managing your previous and existing deployments. It does not, this encourages you to take a look at what new technologies are out there and how can I best utilize them, because you don't have to worry about how am I going to manage this alongside my previous and legacy deployment. The single platform solves that for you. It enables you to be flexible as you look to how, your strategy of how you want to evolve and how you want to change your product to be more successful in the marketplace. Additionally, a single platform gives you more control through distribution, especially look for platforms that have abilities to provide a multi-tier account hierarchy. What this does is it enables a kind of parent and child account scenario where individual distributors can be empowered to manage their own connected devices. Distributors can do either their own activations or their own level of troubleshooting. Not only does this help simplify management through distribution, create more automation, but it also empowers your distributors to resolve issues themselves. It makes it easier on your support team, because those distributors can, if they receive a report of an issue or a device not connecting, they can go and view their own initial set of information around device activity and what it's been doing. They can actually provide the tier 1 support to the customer on the initial connectivity checks to see what's going on, and then escalate to your support team for any real issues, so that your support team is only managing issues that are very important. And a lot of the one-off questions or the one-off tickets or the one-off misunderstandings around device behavior, which result in so many trouble tickets. Distributors can be empowered to take that on themselves. They don't have to rely on your support team for everything. It also opens up the possibility, the opportunity for you to automate billing to those distributors. By having each distributor with its own sub-account, their devices individually are now, separated from each other. So it's easier for you to understand how much you owe or how much you need to charge distributor A versus how much you need to charge distributor B. Makes it easier for you to resell that connectivity, as I had mentioned before, so that you can open up a new revenue stream in a way that's far more easy to manage, far less taxing on your operation or billing systems. Enable that to be done in a much faster and scalable way. And then lastly, this opens up the possibility for a single support structure. Being able to leverage one support team of experts, one single SLA for all connectivity issues. Being able to have your support team built around a single set of processes and a single set of support expectations, in addition to the increased visibility that you're going to have by having a single pane of glass for all your deployments. That aspect of it is going to help you resolve issues on your own before having to call somebody, which ultimately is where you want to be empowered with self-service tools so that you, when you identify an issue, you have options and you have a direction of what you think is going to work to resolve that issue. That only comes with increased visibility. But if there is an issue that needs support, you know exactly who to call for all of your connectivity issues. You don't have to figure out which 1-800 number to call and so forth. They can be set up as the platform support that has ties into the networks that you're currently utilizing to simplify that support structure for you. So again, a single platform, if I boil it down to a couple of key takeaways, is really all around reducing your operational costs by increasing the visibility and control that you have and simplifying the number of processes required to perform any single task. They can be standardized across your entire deployment. Again, whatever carrier agreements you have, whatever operational or whatever wireless other technologies you're using, that can all be streamlined. This also enables more rapid product evolution because you are not stuck to the processes of a single technology. You have insurance that you can expand beyond just what you're doing today in a way that's more scalable. Again, single set of processes, single set of APIs, that single interface allows you to layer on new carriers, layer on new technologies on the back end of that platform so that you have no changes to your business in terms of how you manage those connections. You can just focus on providing value to your customers and scaling successfully. So ultimately, as you look to see, I'm sure that some of what I said during the drivers are things that resonate with you, and different things are going to resonate to different people based on the solution you're building, where you are in that life cycle. And as you look to solve some of those challenges, I highly recommend as you look to see who your providers will be, whether it's platform or connectivity or cellular or LPWA, whatever it is. Consolidation is ultimately what's going to provide you the environment where you can scale and lower your costs. So, the key takeaway today is as you look to solve those challenges, look for somebody that's going to be able to provide you that single platform. So, before we get into the Q&A, I have one other poll question for you, which is, what non-cellular connectivity have you considered for your deployment? Cellular has often been a popular pick, but there are other options out there. So for those of you that have started to look into additional technologies, what have you looked into? And a lot of this is going to help us figure out what topic we want to pick next for further education on this stuff for the next webinar. So if you could take a second to review these options and then submit the ones that you've been looking at, and we will take a look at those poll results very shortly. And once more, as they load, just as a quick recap on again, the key takeaway today is look for the single management platform. That's what's going to make your life easier. That's what's going to lower your costs and enable you to grow and evolve in this quickly changing IoT environment. It's going to enable you to add carriers and manage a multiple carrier environment and the complexities that come with that. It's going to enable you to add new technologies, utilize the benefits of these new technologies rolling out without making it taxing on your operational structure, your operational teams. And then also automate your supply chain, especially as you go through multiple layers of distribution, offloading some of those support capabilities down, empowering your distribution channels to manage their own connectivity, and lowering your costs in the process. So now let's just very quickly take a look at some of the non-cellular technologies you've explored. No surprise that Wi-Fi is the leading candidate, and very common, very popular for a lot of reasons. Largely because of availability, but also cost. It's a very attractive one. As part of a separate topic, we'll probably want to share what we're doing with our cellular Wi-Fi hybrid connectivity option, where we are turning cellular connectivity plus securely managed Wi-Fi into a single subscription to manage. So, but looks like also a healthy mix of other technologies, LPWA, satellite, short range, and even some others. So, I think that these results actually do a great job of showing that there are many connectivity technologies out there, and for the right IoT applications, a lot of them make a lot of sense. And so, we will stay tuned for more information coming about these different technologies. So, with that, thank you all very much for joining today. I hope we covered some things that are going to be useful for you as you look to grow and evolve your solution. And hopefully you had a chance to throw in some questions. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sue, and we will take a look at your questions.
Okay, so thank you, Evan. That was a really informative presentation. I learned a lot from that. Now it's time for the Q&A. This is the audience's chance to pose questions directly to Evan, and quite a few have already been submitted. If anything else comes to mind, feel free to ask them via the Q&A widget as we go along. So the first question, how far along in maturity and development is Wi-Fi connected calling?
Wi-Fi connected calling, I guess, good question. And I don't know if I know the answer to that one, simply because it's not voice calls over Wi-Fi is what I think you're getting at. We don't see a lot of that in IoT solutions. Every now and then you see deployments that do have, the need for Wi-Fi, whether it's the need for voice calls, whether it's the need to make sometimes in healthcare solutions or emergency responding solutions, the ability the need to call 911 and so forth. I think that there certainly are solutions, and we know that it works in the cellulars, the consumer handset space to have those, but not something that we've seen a lot from IoT deployment. So an interesting concept and something I'll have to research a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next question. When using a single common platform, how do you address differing quality of data? So, and I guess that refers to the types of data sets.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that, ultimately what, the platform really enables you to manage those solutions. And so obviously doesn't have an impact on the underlying network that you've selected and are utilizing. And so it can't necessarily change the quality of service of that. What it does allow you to do is understand where you're having those problems. The single consolidated view that the single platform provides allows you to see where you're having, where you're getting higher quality of service and which devices are not, not connecting properly or experiencing a lower quality of service. You can see those trends over time. You can have that visibility and that insight so that you can then figure out what the corrective action will be, whether it's, instead utilizing more of the networks that you have higher quality of service on, or instead, figuring out working with that network provider to increase the quality of service. The value that the single platform provides is that you know what's going on, and you know what's going on without having to piece together information and do manual comparisons to say, on platform one and service network one, I see that the quality of service is okay, but on platform 2 and network 2, I see that it's better, so let me pull that information and manually compare. The single platform lets you see side by side in a single report, single view, exactly what's going on between the two. So, it'll help you keep track of those things, know that it's happening, and inform you with the right data, the right information, so that you can then go figure out the right corrective action.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next question relates to edge computing. So what about immediately actionable edge data like machine to machine or vehicle to vehicle, where a management platform is too slow?
Sure. So, a lot of that is going to be application specific. And really what that does is it does not, I don't view those as necessarily, either or. I think that they can go well together simply because, if for certain applications, like you mentioned a couple, where edge computing is going to be critical and especially to offload, figure out what really needs to be sent back. Ultimately, that device is going to be needing to send something back, right? Just because you're doing a lot of the computing at the gateway or at the edge, some information will need to be sent back to whether it's to the cloud or to the back end and so forth. So the management platform is focused on managing that connection, understanding what that when it decides to send information up, what is it doing there? And so that's a lot of application specifics there, but certainly I can see them going well together.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next question. Would the use of SIM chips and over-the-air configuration help simplify the complexity of handling multiple carrier connectivity?
Sure. It's a great question. And so I think that, really what you're getting to is the underlying capabilities of, say, an EUICC or an embedded SIM that has subscription management capabilities. And so, the concept there is fantastic, and the technology is very exciting. For those that are not familiar, it's a SIM card that can, really be able to store and manage multiple carrier profiles so that, a carrier profile can be used for the activation, and if it goes to a certain region, it can be, a different carrier profile can be added, effectively doing the same thing that a SIM swap would do in today's environment where any one SIM is locked to a single provider. Can certainly help streamline, supply chain because you can move from a multi-SKU environment where, maybe you had one SKU that was specific to the U.S. and one SKU that was specific to European deployments. You can now consolidate those into a single device that you're tracking through your manufacturing or even distribution. And then based on where that device gets shipped, when it pops up, you can load the correct profile from there. That concept has a lot of benefit to IoT solutions, even beyond just on the supply chain side. Opens up the possibility for service insurance, for example. If you deploy on one provider and you have those capabilities built into your SIM card, if for whatever reason that relationship goes south, whether the quality of service isn't right or the support is not good enough over time, say you have a better offer coming from a different provider, this opens up the ability technically for you to migrate that device to the new provider over the air. These EUICC technology, this is all standardized technologies, and so all the carriers have the capabilities to support this, and it has a lot of potential for IoT solutions. The thing that you need to keep in mind today is really more around the business, around these types of solutions. In a lot of ways so far we've seen from the carriers, from the mobile network operators, a hesitation to engage in these type of solutions because it introduces the potential that device will be migrated off of their network permanently. For those of you who know how carriers think and operate, net subscriptions is something that's very important to them. And this technology enables a scenario where multiple, an entire deployment could switch off of their network overnight. And so, the hesitation today with EUICC SIMs and subscription management capabilities is really not around the technology. The technology exists. We have our own subscription management platform, for example, and we can support EUICC SIMs, and we view that again as a great potential, enabler for IoT deployments and giving more power to the solution owners. But I think it's going to be a little while before the carriers start to engage in these types of solutions in a big way. So, great question. Very promising technology. I think we're a couple years away from having it be, the full potential realized in a broad way for IoT.
Okay. Next question is, where does Aris stand in the IoT tech stack framework?
Great question. So a lot of what we've talked about is around the connectivity layer, and that is where historically we've always focused in providing connectivity and providing connectivity management capabilities to our IoT customers who are building their own solutions. that continues to be a focus for us today. We continue to provide solutions there and really provide platform solutions. A lot of what we talked about today are different things, different ways that we're thinking about IoT deployments and connectivity. But we also do provide additional pieces moving, including a lot of the middleware in terms of cloud storage and analytics and so forth. And even for some industries closer to an end-to-end application, although we don't, that's really specific to a lot of what we do with automotive car manufacturers, where we actually have a full end-to-end connected car platform that we provide, everything from remote door unlock capabilities to call center support. That's really the only vertical where we focused in true end-to-end solutions. But our application platform, we provide a lot of those pieces as well, especially for OEMs around the world who are looking to track and manage moving things, giving them the ability to build their own platform, their own application on top of our platform. So we certainly do more than just the connectivity, although today was a larger focus on some of the more connectivity-focused topics.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Here's a question about analytics. So are there not good analytics that can be built, and are there any challenges in building those analytics?
So, there are really two types of analytics. One is, and I'm not sure which direction you're asking, analyzing the data, the underlying data that is being captured and sent. So in the example of, a telematics solution that's collecting information from the engine performance and tire pressure and so forth. Analyzing that underlying data, there's lots of options there, but I want to focus on the other side of it, which is probably more specific to the topic today and the audience today, which is analytics around connectivity data. And that's where we have focused a lot in terms of what we want to provide with our platform and those capabilities to provide a single view of what's going on. Providing, analytics that can be used to, track device performance over time, both on the billing side and the usage side, so that usage over time can be turned into trends an understanding of trends over time, so that solutions continue to be optimized. And again, our focus is to do that across multiple carriers, multiple technologies, so that you don't have to go figure out ways to build those own analytics capabilities. That's all done, and that's part of the value that we look to provide to our customers. And so there are ways that you could go build it yourself, I'm sure, but we look to do it in a way that's far more easy to integrate, far more easy to scale with, and take that burden off of you as part of our platform. So again, two different sides of the analytics, but the connectivity analytics we view as certainly a very critical piece to providing a single view of a multi-carrier, multi-technology environment.
Okay. The next question is, scaling to monitor multiple assets in multiple locations is a significant challenge. I think this means what is needed to monitor an asset with multiple sensors. For example, I saw a wind turbine application recently where each windmill was enabled with 50 sensors. Admittedly, this was a case study to demonstrate ROI and proof of concept, but with certain asset types, a single sensor is simply not feasible. So the question is, how do you handle assets with multiple sensors?
Yeah. Okay. And I see I've only got a minute or two left here, so I'll try to answer this one briefly because I think we're about to run out of time. But a lot of that's going to be application dependent. Based on what types of information you're looking to collect from whatever it is that you're connecting. And so, in that example, a lot of it's going to depend on how that solution was architected. Was it architected to was the application designed to be able to see the individual reporting from those 50 sensors on that windmill, and the gateway that's sending that information back simply serves as a vehicle? Or did they, an earlier question around, more the edge computing, did that gateway pick and choose what to send back and send it back in kind of a consolidated report to treat the windmill as a whole? Lots of details there that make that answer a bit tricky to answer right now, and there's ultimately lots of different ways to structure it. I think for questions like that are very application specific, and I guess for anybody else, if there are any questions that you have based on that might be specific to your application or specific to your scenario or specific to the challenges, that you may have, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to sit down with you and take a look at what you're going through, what you're trying to build, and provide our recommendations as to the best ways to go about that. So sorry I couldn't answer it specifically for you, but please feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to take a look at the details of your request and see what we can do for you.
Okay. Thank you, Evan. And I'm afraid that is all we have time for today. I know that there were a lot of questions that came in that we didn't get to, but we will make sure that those get in front of Evan. So he definitely will see those questions. Before we sign off, I'd like to thank our presenter, Evan Whitelock, and Aeris Communications. Thank you so much for attending, and have a great day.